Okay, in this second video, where we continue our introduction to viruses, we're going to look at how a virus uses a host cell to have its, quote, borrowed life. So here we see our virus, and again, to remind you of the two parts, it consists of a capsid made of various proteins, and then the viral genome. In this case, we're looking at a virus that contains DNA. Now, the virus has to find some way to get into a host cell. And as you'll see, there are some very particular cell-to-cell recognition mechanisms that are going to be used that allows the virus to only enter into a specific host cell. You might recall we called that the host range, in that viruses typically are only able to infect very particular hosts, and it has to do with the proteins on the capsid and the proteins on the surface of the host cell. So if this virus is able to use this particular host cell, the virus will entry and it will go through a process called uncoding. And this is where the capsid sort of breaks down, exposing the viral genome. Now, in this situation, remember that the virus can't replicate or can't metabolize or do anything with its genome outside of the cell. But once inside, our viral DNA can be replicated as the host cell is tricked into thinking that it's its own DNA. So additional copies of the DNA molecules are made through the process of DNA replication. In addition, in this particular virus, messenger RNA molecules are going to be made from the viral genome, and these genes are then going to be transcribed and used to manufacture capsid proteins. Now, these capsid proteins will then go through this process of assembly, enclosing the new replicated viral DNA, and we will create more viral particles, and these viral particles then can rupture and exit the cell. So notice in this mechanism that what has happened is the virus has entered the host cell and tricked the host cell into thinking that it was making more copies of itself or doing something it was supposed to do. And in reality, what was happening is it was creating more viruses, and these viruses then can leave and go infect other cells, and this cycle will continue. And it's for this reason that these viruses many times are pathogens. The viruses, once they enter the host cells, may damage the cell or kill the cells during their viral life cycles. A lot of times when a viral infection is seen, a person may have an accompanying fever or aches and pains, and these aches and pains and fever are literally from the host's immune system trying to fight off the infection of these viruses, which can be very difficult if those viruses are hiding inside of the host cells, and the host cells are then doing the virus's job for them. Now, most viruses are very difficult to treat because of the symptoms, but viruses are often use vaccines to try and prevent viral infections. Now, there's a whole host of different types of vaccines. Some are harmless variants or derivatives of a pathogenic virus that are given to a person or to an organism to help stimulate that person's immune system. One of the ways that your body responds to a viral infection is to produce antibodies, which again recognize those proteins on the surface of those capsids and can help to fight them off. And although vaccines can help prevent certain viral infections, current medical technology offers little in the way of curing a viral infection once it's established. It literally just has to kind of run its course. So we want to think about some common vaccines. Vaccines like the rabies vaccine that you make sure and give your dog or your cat are important at controlling the rabies virus. Some people get a flu shot to help prevent the influenza infection. There's things like polio vaccines and diphtheria vaccines that have been developed over time to help cure some of these very, very common viral, or help prevent these very, very viral, very common viral diseases. Now, viruses on a large scale can cause things known as epidemics. So an epidemic is a widespread outbreak of a viral type illness. This could occur, let's say, if somebody in class got influenza and that spread to another person and another. And before you know it, 25 or 30 people in an area are exhibiting this viral disease. This is different than a pandemic. And a pandemic is where the epidemic spreads and becomes global. And the pandemic has really become a thing for pathogenic biologists to be able to need to understand here recently, because as humans evolved, we were fairly sedentary organisms, but humans today in 2024 live in a global economy, in a global world, and viral diseases from different parts of the world are very easily transmitted by people traveling. And so epidemics nowadays turn into pandemics very, very easily. So just a couple of examples of an epidemic outbreak that turned into a pandemic would be the H1N1 flu virus. This was seen in 2009, originated in Mexico, and then spread through some travelers to the United States. By 2010, it had spread over 200 countries and infected over 600,000 people, killing over 8,000. And then, of course, the one that has occurred within all of our lifetimes, the COVID-19 virus, that was a global pandemic, started in 2019 and really had an impact on our world in 2020. So let's just take a look at a few important human viruses. The HIV virus, which stands for the human immunodeficiency virus. This is called a retrovirus because it contains RNA, and the host cells take the RNA and make DNA from it, which is inserted into the genome. So it's actually working backwards. Instead of making RNA from DNA, these viruses trick the cell into making DNA from RNA. And the HIV virus causes something known as AIDS, which stands for the acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. The rhinovirus causes the common cold. Various strains of the herpes virus cause things such as the sexually transmitted disease herpes, common cold sores or fever blisters, things like shingles and chicken pox. Interesting about these herpes viruses, once a person has them, they tend to stay inside of their body, and at certain times, especially when your body's nervous system undergoes a type of stress, it creates an environment where these viruses can get into and infect cells again, and you have an outbreak. Now, the last thing I want to talk about are these things called prions. And prions are not viruses at all. We're going to include them here because these prions are actually infectious proteins, and they're usually found in brain or nervous tissue, and their presence can impact the shape and therefore the function of normal proteins. Prions cause things like Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease in humans, mad cow disease in cows or bovines, something called scrapie in sheep, and here recently a new prion-caused disease known as chronic wasting disease has been seen in cervids. Cervids are deer, like white-tailed deer, moose, elk, etc. And the way that these prions work is we have a normal protein that is impacted by this misshapen prion protein. And what happens is the prion changes the shape of a normal protein, and then we see these aggregations of these prions, and these misshapen proteins, of course, cause the protein's functions to change, and it causes in these diseases that we just mentioned these strange brain lesions to form.